a wonderful tool. And also I will give you some tool to read the Raman paper, because sometimes it can be confusing for non-experts. So I like to start with history. So Raman in the 19th, he did a long travel by boat. And during this travel, he wrote a paper for Nature. And just by looking at the sea, so this is a picture of the sea in Corsica, and he wondered why the sea is blue. So at that time, maybe 10 years earlier, Rayleigh explained why the sky is blue, and the main idea at that time was just that the sea reflects the sky, so that's why it's blue. But in fact, it's wrong. And Raman explained that the inelastic scattering of the sunlight on the molecule of water make it blue. So this is an inspiration for this topic. And we also have to note that this there was a theoretical prediction of this effect in 1923, and it was really measured thanks to technical improvement at that time in 1928, because Raman was able to buy mercury arc lamps, and also to make really a proper measurement, he bought a quartz spectrograph that you can see also in this picture, and this is Raman, which always had this turban on all the picture. So this is the first measurement of the one I found the most clear, so maybe not so clear, but it's a measurement, you see it's published in this Indian paper and also in Nature, same year, 28. So this is a liquid benzene, and here it's just the spectra of the mercury arc lamp, and here it's the spectra when you put in front of it the liquid benzene. So you can see additional line here. And of course, already at that time, they realized that Raman's spectroscopy is very helpful, because it will give you a fingerprint of all the material, and mainly from the vibration of the molecule. So he won the Nobel Prize very little time after, in the 30s, and it's amazing because I compare, for instance, with Cameron-Ingalls. It was a proper Nobel Prize for this effect, and already at that time the effect was named after him. So it's like a good politician also, I think. And also there was a similar discovery of the same year in 28, but this guy was not implied in the Nobel Prize. And from then, of course, there were a lot of technical improvements, and most important for this technique to be very much used is that the invention of the laser in the 60s and the CCD camera in the 80s. So what is Raman scattering? It's an elastic scattering of light by materials. So here you have incident light with energy and vector and also polarization. From the sample, you have a reflected light, which is usually a problem for us, and over a type of process, and the scattered light, which is isotrope in space. So when the energy of this is the same as the scattered one, it's elastic scattering or Rayleigh scattering, and when it's different, it's inelastic scattering or Raman scattering. And of course you have conservation of energy and of wave vector. So what can we probe? I will show you many examples. Already what can we probe? We can probe phonon, of course, so this is the most most excitation, which is probed by Raman scattering. So you can probe a structural transition, for instance in STO that you like very much. And you can probe particle hole excitation, so you can probe a Drude excitation from a metal. You can probe magnetic excitation, magno or electromagno in multiferric. You can probe local excitation, like crystal field excitation on a rare earth ions. You can probe superconductivity, including superconducting modes, charge density wave amplitude, which are not so far from phonon, etc. So in fact, we can probe many, many things, and sometimes what is difficult is to know what we see. And for that, we can get some information from the symmetry of the excitation that I will explain. Okay, this is an illustration of the process. So you have this ground state here, one virtual state. So you excite the electrons. It's always electrons which are involved, and the electric field of light. So you excite the electron from here to this virtual state, or it can be also real state, then it's resonant Raman scattering. And then you get back to this energy, and the difference of energy, omega, can be given by any type of excitation. So finally what you report is the intensity, number of phonons you get, versus the Raman shift. So the Raman shift is the difference between omega S and omega E. So then you get the energy directly, the energy of the excitation. So usually on the Raman spectra we have this extremely large elastic scattering line, and we have here on the right a Stokes excitation, which means that we have created a phonon, for instance, and anti-Stokes excitation, that we mean we have absorbed an excitation. So you already realize that there will be a difference in the spectrum depending on the temperature, because you need on that side that the excitation is already in the system. So if you increase the temperature, you have more excitation, and then you have larger signal on that side. So if we compare both, we can sometimes give information on the temperature of the system. So more important is that, as I said, you have conservation of the wave vector. So a maximum value you can get is this one, where it is incident wave vector of light. And you realize that taking the wavelength of the laser line, it will be very, very much smaller than the Brillouin border. This is A is the unit cell parameter. So we always probe excitation with a total wave vector very close to 0. It's a zone center probe. Okay, here I just want to show you a typical real spectra on this compound, which has a phonon, of course. Here you have electronic continuum here, and also here you can see one crystal field excitation on the praseodymium atoms. And here we usually report the symmetry we probe, so I'll give you more information about it later. So we like Raman people, they like to speak in a wave number, centimeter minus 1. And here I give you some convention. So just remember that 1 milliV is about 10 wave number. So it's somehow it's a good thing to have in mind when you read the Raman paper. Okay, so here I will show you some very classical model to explain the Raman effect, and we will see how it gives rise to the Raman selection rule. So you have here the electric field which is coming from the laser, so it's just a sinusoidal, and you because of that you induce electric dipole of this molecule, for instance. And we take it as linear. We forgot the higher order. And so for small atomic movements, you can also do a tailored development. And with U will be, it's a force system, so U is also a sinusoidal. You do a little bit of trigonometry. and you get this polarization. So you have here excitation at the same frequency as the excited line, so this is the Rayleigh scattering. And then here you have two more terms which have different energy. Here you have a stock term, so you created a phonon here, for instance. And here you have an anti-stock term, so you destroy the phonon. And and you have this term here, which is most important, which is polarizability. So then, from this process, very simple calculation, you see that Raman scattering is a consequence of modulation in time of the incident electric field by vibration of a molecule. And then you get two new frequencies, stock and anti-stock. Then you can do a calculation of the intensity you get, which is what you really measure. And you get this term, which is average on a cycle, on time. And this is a stock polarization here. So if we write it a little bit condensed shape, and if we and the quantum calculation give you the same kind of term, you have here the intensity, Raman intensity, and here you have correlation function associated to the fluctuation of a system. So it can be phonon, as I said, it can be magnon, or any kind of fluctuation you can imagine. And here you have a polarizability, depending on the excitation of the system. And here you have two polarization. Polarization of the incident photon and polarization of the scattered photon. And this gives you this Raman tensor, which is a feature of the symmetry of the excitation. And you get information on that from the group theory. So I will give you here more insight about that. So from this term, this is a tensor, a matrix. So here is a matrix you will find on some website, for instance. And you multiply by the scattered polarization and the incident polarization. So first, where can we find this matrix? So there is a very useful tool, which is a website, Bilbao crystallography. And it's really huge. I'm really not able to tell you everything which is inside it. It's very, very useful. So if you select a Raman spectroscopy and SAM, and here you enter the space group. So for phonon it's quite easy. You just insert the group of the lattice. But for overexcitation, we will see that you have to consider the local symmetry of the excitation. And here I take one example, which is this compound, which has this D4H group symmetry. And here you enter the Vikov position of the atom. So usually you find that in very old papers from the 70s, where chemists did a great job and they give you the Vikov position of all atoms. And then you get that. So this is the character tables. So what do you have here? You have here the space group. Here you have all the symmetry operation of this space group. And here you have what we call the irreducible representation. So it's the symmetry of all the possible symmetry of this group. And here you have some character, and which give you information on the, how the irreducible representation transform on this symmetry operation. So for instance, A1G is the full symmetry, so it's 1 everywhere. And here, in front of the irreducible representation, you have a symmetry of function, which tells you how this irreducible representation will transform in space. So for instance, here you recognize a sphere, full circle, and here this one is more, little bit more strange because it transforms like a anti-vector, like GZ, like a spin. And okay, and what you see also is that you have two columns here. This is two different ways of writing the reducible representation. We have a lot of different notation in Raman, depending on if you read paper from chemist or physicist, or old paper or new paper. So I will give you some information on that also. Okay, and if you look below that, you have the matrix. Matrix, I just, but you need to calculate the selection rule. So it's, for instance, A1G, B1G, etc. Okay, so, and it's extremely useful tool, but I have to say that there's some limitation because this website is really phono-oriented. So it's really for people who study the structure. But by Raman scattering, we can probe many different kinds of excitation. I will show you there. And for instance, for this phase group, the A2G symmetry is Raman active, but they don't give you the matrix. So then you have to look at old paper, or there are also other websites I will show you later. I found few mistakes, so I heard that I just have to write to the guy and they will do something about it. But also, as I said, there are much more information that I just showed to you, so it's, please have a look if you like group theory. Okay, this is notation, so I have no explanation why, but it's really confusing sometimes. And okay, just look at it first. Notation for the reducible representation. There are two. One is the base notation, where they like to use gamma, and the Mulliken notation, where they like to use A, B, E, T. And here you have some, if you know about it, you have some information about the, how it transforms through the symmetry operation. And there is a correspondence, as I said, between both, and Bilbao is the best website to find this correspondence. Sometimes when you read the Raman paper, they give you this. They use this Porto notation. So this is a notation which is related to the orientation of the polarization versus the axis of the sample, of the main axis of the crystal. So here you have incident momentum, scatter momentum, and polarization of incident light and the scattered light. So sometimes they just drop this and they just write, for instance, x or zz. So it's usually it's simple. It's just orientation of the polarization, and it's x is just 1, 0, 0 direction. Sometimes they use x prime, so it just means it's rotated by 45 degrees, for instance, if you have a tetragonal group. If you have something more complex, I don't know, maybe. I hope they explain. And sometimes they say like LL, right, or so this is a circular polarization. Sometimes you can see on the spectra that they write A1G plus B2G, or I don't know, so just it means that with this orientation of polarization, you probe a sum of two symmetry. And there will be some a prefactor in front of each of the symmetry that you can calculate from the matrix, and the matrix you find on below. Okay. So maybe keep this slide somewhere in case you read the Raman paper at some point and you don't understand what they speak about. Okay, here I give you one example. Again, this compound, which is a simple one, tetragonal symmetry. And so we know from this compound that all these irreducible representation are available from Bilbao, and we also know that this one will be Raman active and this one will be infrared active. Because I will tell you about that. It's an inversion center in the compound, so they are, depending on the probe you use, you don't see the same phonon. Okay, so here, for instance, I take the EG matrix. Okay, this is the tensor. And I do the calculation of this configuration So this is this one. And I found no 0. So it's not a Raman active for this configuration. And this is what you see, the black curve. You don't see the EG phonon. But if you use this perpendicular orientation of polarization, you have finite signal and you see this EG. So, and it's opposite for B1G plus A1G. Okay, so you can play with polarization of light. You can turn the sample also, for instance, with AtoCube in your cryostat if you measure at low temperature, etc. So there are other kinds of excitation than phonon, as I said, and for instance, for crystal field excitation. So here the selection rules are different. So this is the scheme of a crystal field of an atom, where the level are split by the crystal field. So this is the ground state and first excited state. Again, here the state. You find the symmetry from group theory, okay? And the selection rule is given by the product of this group, of this irreducible representation. And here you need to do this calculation in the local point group of the atom. And it can be different from the space group of the system. And here I give you an example of multiplication table. So it depends also on how many electrons you have on the ions. Is it even or odd? But here it will be even. So you look at this one, and so you multiply this by this, and this is given in the Kostler book, which you can find also on internet. I will give you the link. And here you see, for instance, that if I'm probing gamma 2 excitation, it can be an excitation between gamma 2 ground states multiplied by gamma 1. It can be gamma 4 multiplied by this one is gamma 3. And it can be also gamma 5 to gamma 5. Okay? So then I know what it can be, and I also know what it cannot be, so it gives me some information on the excitation and also on the ground state of the system. Okay, so now I will move to the experiment. So as I said, when you use sunlight on the compound, you have Rayleigh scattering and Raman scattering, and Rayleigh scattering is very much intense, so it's like 10 to the power 7 or 10 to the power 10, much larger than the Raman scattering. So either you use a simple spectrometer with some notch filter, then until recently you are able to probe excitation above 50 or 100 wave number. But if you want to probe excitation below that, you need a special spectrometer, which is here. So it's a triple subtractive spectrometer where the two first stage, so this is a grating here, the two first stage are used to reject the Rayleigh line. And the third one is just usually used to make the wavelength dependence. We also use a CCD with a very high quantum efficiency, like it can be about 90% or even more. And we use, of course, a laser, the source, and between all that you have a sample here. And between the laser and the sample, you can expand the beam because it will make the spot smaller. So for instance, here we have a spot at about 50 micrometer, but it can be much smaller. And we choose a particular orientation of the polarization of the incident light. And then we get rid of the reflected light, because it will go there, because we don't want it to be added to the Rayleigh scattering. To get more Raman signal compared to the elastic line. And here also we analyze the polarization of light. And so then we can play with this and with a matrix depend of irreducible representation. So thanks to that, we are able to measure excitation down to about 5 wave number. And oh yes, also here an information about how deep we measure by Raman scattering. Like for instance compared to ARPAS, which is really, or STM, and also compared to infrared. So Raman scattering is between both. The penetration depth of light can be very large, like for instance in BFO, it's transparent, so it's very large, but for metal it can be much smaller, from 10 to 100 nanometer. Okay, so yes, it's a picture of this spectrometer. So you have the CCD camera, and of course we always work in the dark. So we sometimes at the end of the day we have some trouble to be able to be in front of very strong light. So, but here you have the sample, and this is the wall spectrometer, and the laser is somewhere here. So there were technical improvement the last 2 years. First, the laser source were made much more compact and much more stable with a very, very narrow line. And so you have here a full range of solid laser systems. And at present they are quite stable, and they last for years. And also I have to say that now, for instance, the gas laser system, they are not anymore. There is no anymore pieces to change them, and there is no technician who wants to repair them. So it's over in 2 years. So everybody buys a solid laser system. Much more interesting for people who want to measure very low energy excitation are this Bragg rating filter. So it's they are made from glass, which were holography recorded, where a grating was in volume was holography, but hologram was recorded inside. And then you can measure, as they say, it really changed the story for us, because it looks like we don't need anymore this complex pre-subtractive system, because with that you are able to measure at very low energy with a simple spectrometer. So, and also it's very useful to clean the laser line. So this laser system, I show you here data from my lab. They are not so perfect because they have also some spurious line here, and the real line is here at 0, of course. So we use this kind of Bragg system by reflection to filter this spurious line, and this is what we get here in the red. So it's also used to filter the analyzed and the scattered light. So here is a scheme of what we can do. So we use 3 of them. We have OD3, so it's total is OD9, so it's perfect to get rid of the red light. And this is a kind of result you can get. If you see here, this is energy is about 10 wave number, and we are able to measure some phonon excitation with a single stage spectrometer, and with these three Bragg filter, we are able to measure down to 10 wave number. So they are extremely useful, I have to say, and sometimes I also use it with a triple spectrometer, just to be able to measure at lower energy. So for instance, if I use one of them on the collection path, I can go from, like, I don't know, from 15 to 8 wave number. So for kind of measurement we do, it's very useful. Okay, and also we can do Raman scattering in many kind of conditions. We can of course measure versus temperature under very high magnetic field. For instance, here you have a measurement of a Landau level of graphene up to 30 Tesla. So you need to go to a high affinity. And we can measure under very high pressure. So for instance, here I show you this superconductor I discussed yesterday. So they show here that this is all of that are phonons. So I show you here that there is a phase transition, about 50 GPa, a change of a phonon. And also I think here you have a change. And you can also measure Raman scattering while applying a gate, an electric field. And you can combine Raman scattering with transport measurement or X-ray scattering or many kinds of measurement. So here I want to show you an example of what we can do, how to measure Raman scattering in extreme conditions. So here it's electronics Raman scattering, meaning that I want to be able to probe very low energy excitation and extreme condition of low temperature, about 3 Kelvin, and very high pressure. So for this, we used this diamond and this cell with a membrane. And so I think you already saw some diamond and cell during these 2 weeks. So just here what we do a little bit more different from other people. We use this Buller type diamond with a shape that this shape gives you a very large numerical aperture. The diamonds are so-called 2AS, which means that they are run under high pressure and high temperature. And so they are really, really high quality, and the signal you get, Raman signal from the diamond, is at low energy is extremely small and extremely flat. So then when you measure Raman scattering of this tiny sample here, you also measure the surrounding, and the signal from the diamond is very small. We also use this angle, so the light coming from here about 30 degrees, so then we don't get the reflected light into the analyzer. And to get low temperature, we made a good thermalization of the sample. So in fact, it's not drawn here, but we use a copper braid. It's a OFHC, so oxygen-free, high conductivity copper braid, which are soldered on the gasket, metallic gasket, and directly to the cold finger of the cryostat. And thanks to that, we students very happy about that. We are able to measure high pressure, low temperature, low energy excitation with very low background. And this is a spectra, an example of spectra we got at 4 Kelvin and 4 GPa. You see that we are able to measure excitation down to 10 wave number in such condition. And here we know that we are below 8 Kelvin because we got big signal, which is a signature of superconductivity, and the superconducting transition is 7 Kelvin.
How do you apply the pressure?
How we apply pressure? It has a membrane here. So we insert helium-4 in the membrane in situ. So we up to about 100 bar, and then we change the pressure like that. So we don't have to heat each time we want to change the pressure. So the cell is big also. It's 5 centimeters. It's a big one. So you need a big cryostat to cool down this all this. Okay, so this is just an example of what we can do, and hopefully in a few years we will be able also to do that, Raman scattering this condition together with, for instance, resistivity measurement or magnetic measurement, all that under high pressure and low temperature. Okay, so now I want to give you some insight of how Raman spectroscopy play with the other probes. So for instance here I show you a very simple dispersion curve of a phonon with one acoustic branch and one optical branch. And here you usually have acoustic phonon, they are probed by Brillouin scattering, for instance. And here optical phonon in the zone center, so it's a transfer wave vector equal to 0. You can probe it by Raman scattering or IR spectroscopy. And the full dispersion is usually given by inelastic neutron scattering or inelastic X-ray scattering. So I will tell you something about the difference for the phonon of these two probes. And I go back to the classical model. So if you remember, I gave you this equation for the polarization. And here you have the polarizability. And of course, a phonon mode is Raman active if this is non-zero. So then you usually get that Raman is able to probe non-symmetric phonon, non-polar phonon, while this one are not, if you are in a compound with a center, inversion center, they are not IR active. And it's opposite for polar mode. They are not Raman active, but they are IR active. So this is the so-called exclusion rule. Raman and IR spectroscopies, they are complementary if you have an inversion center in the system. So one example, I go back to this compound. I already shown you that the Raman scattering result, and this is the IR spectroscopy result. So you see that we are able to probe EU, AU, A2U, A2U, but we don't see all the other one and vice versa. So now I will tell you about complementary between Raman spectroscopy and these two probes. So for phonon again. So here illustration is given by this compound, novium selenium 2. And this compound has a charge density wave order. So it's a modulation of the density of states, which is associated with the movement of the atom. So it's associated with a phonon mode. So here you have a dispersion of the phonon measured at different temperatures. So the transition is at 30 Kelvin or 33 Kelvin for this compound. And it was measured by elastic X-ray scattering. So I'm not an expert, but sometimes they use neutrons, sometimes they use X-ray. I think it's related to the kind of atom you have inside the sample to measure the phonon dispersion. So what you see here is that at 250 Kelvin, you have this small dip, but it becomes deeper and deeper, and it is equal to 0 at the transition. So you have a phonon which is going completely soft at the charge density wave transition. And you can see that by Raman scattering. So in fact, I told you that Raman scattering is able to probe only phonon at the zone center, but it's not completely true. We are also able to probe two phonon excitation. So the total wave vector, transfer wave vector has to be 0, but you can do like plus q, minus q, and it will be 0. So here, because you have this shape, you have a very large density here, and this can give you some Raman signal that you see here. And we indeed see that when you cool down, you see this shift. And as it decreases in energy, you see it shift to low energy. So this is the first connection between these two probes. And there's a second one, which is this one. So after you have the charge density wave transition, you have a Brillouin folding. And finally, the folding is like that. So this guy will go back to 0 here. And then this excitation will become Raman active as a single excitation. So what you see here is this excitation. So here it's 0 at the transition, and when you cool down, it becomes harder, and it is what you see by Raman scattering here. So, and also, yes, I want to show you this tiny thing, because this is also due to brilliance unfolding, but it's a much higher energy dispersion curve, and you see also this tiny thing. So this is something quite usual you are able to see structural transition by Raman scattering because of brilliance unfolding. So, okay, now how many time I have? Okay. So I want to give you some illustration about what we can do by Raman scattering. So there is a very trendy topic, which is few-layer system, graphene of course, but also dechalcogenide. And Raman scattering is mainly used to be able to tell you how many layers you have. So it's very much known for graphene, so you can probe this 2D, a set of double phonon modes here at this high energy. And more recently also, thanks to this Bragg filter I told you, we were able to measure, not me, but were able to measure this shear mode. So it's 2 layers which are moving like that. So then you don't see it when there is a monolayer, but thanks to that, you are able to say how many layers you have. And you get also additional phonon excitation, for instance, as I show you in MOS2. So you have this shear mode, but also over 1 here. So directly it's a good probe at ambient temperature. Very easily you can tell how many layers you got. And of course, as I show you, you can also probe in graphene electronic excitation, for instance, the excitation between Landau levels. So what about superconductivity? I wanted to make some connection with my talk from yesterday. So as I told you yesterday, you have a gap in the excitation in superconductivity, 2 delta. So with Raman scattering, you can excite a Cooper pair, and you create 2 quasi-particles. And then this is a typical scheme of the Raman spectra you get by superconductivity. No excitation, like you have by STM, for instance. And suddenly you have a full set of possible excitation at 2 delta, and then it goes down. So indeed, we are able to measure that at very low temperature. So it's not niobium selenium 2, but niobium sulfur 2. It's a pure superconductor, very simple one. And we measure 2 delta by STM, and comparison, this is this line here. And you get, in fact, at 2 Kelvin, you get this nice peak exactly at 2 delta, which is removed when you hit above TC, which is 6 Kelvin. A little bit more complex in the cuprate. So it's a very widely used technique to study cuprates. And if you remember, in the cuprate, you have the Fermi surface and you have the superconducting gap with nodes. So what is quite interesting, another kind of selection rule, I didn't tell you yet, is that if you change the orientation of a polarization, its real space, its oxygen and copper, you can probe different zones in the brilliant zone. So, for instance, in this configuration, B1G, you probe these 4 points, which are here, here, and here. So they are, we call it antinodal. So it's not at the node, it's where the gap is fully open. And if you do B2G, you probe at 45 degrees, so it's exactly along the node. Okay, so the result, I should skip that. So the result is here. When you do B1G, antinodal, so you probe a full gap, and this is exactly what you have here in red, and it very much looks like the schema I showed you. So excitation is not 0, but it's quite small until you reach 2 delta. And in the node, in B2G, you probe the node, so it means that you can create quasi-particles with very low energy, and this is why here you have already some Raman intensity at small energy, and you get this peak, which is a little bit shifted from the other one. So Raman scattering is also able to probe, if you play with the symmetry, you are also able to probe different regions in the brilliant zone. It is true for superconductivity, it's true also if you have electronic gap, for instance, and if it's not isotrope in K-space. Another illustration for superconductivity is the Higgs mode. So why it's Higgs? This is the Mexican hat potential I showed you yesterday. So when you are in the ground state, you fluctuate. So you have two ways to fluctuate. You can fluctuate the phase, and you can fluctuate the amplitude of the other parameter. So fluctuation of the phase is the so-called Goldstone mode, and because it's a charged system, it's pushed to the plasmon frequency at high energy. But fluctuation of the amplitude it's finite. It costs energy to move like that, and there is a direct analogy between this excitation and the boson, the Higgs boson. So it comes from analogy from the first paper of Higgs in the '64. So this mode, like the real boson, the real Higgs mode is very difficult to measure. It's a dark mode, so in superconductivity also it does not carry speed, it does not carry charge, so it does not couple to any probe. But thanks to some particular condition, a coexisting order between superconductivity and other order, we are able to measure it by Raman scattering. So here is a phase diagram of this nobium selenium-2 compounds. So you have charge density wave. So I will show you this condition. And now if you cool down further, you have superconductivity. And they coexist in this range of temperature pressure. So what we've done, we measure Raman scattering here and here. So this is the two spectra. You have this charge density wave mode, which is, as I told you, due to brilliant zone unfolding. And when you cool down below TC, you have this huge, it's not so huge, but compared to the rest, it's huge, very narrow, intense peak, and it really appears just below TC. And when we apply pressure, we go here in the pure superconducting state, and you see that we get the small Cooper pair breaking peak I show you, the one we also see in the cuprate, and but not anymore this peak, which is below 2 delta also. So we've done a full theory, and we explain that this peak is a consequence of the presence of a Higgs fluctuation on this charge density wave mode. So this mode, in fact, when you cool down, is splitted, and it gives some Raman spectral weight to this charge and to this superconducting Higgs mode. Do I have time for? Yeah. Okay. I wanted to speak about BFO. So BFO, you know it very well, so I won't go too much in detail. But under high pressure, you have a lot of structural transition. So what we measure Raman scattering of the phonon and also the magnetic excitation of this compound under high pressure. So for the phonon, we are able to see all the first 4 transitions from R3C to PNMA, and there's 3 phases which are not completely known yet, but we see clearly at low energy there's change in the phonon spectra, so this is the energy of the phonon. We've done some calculation, and we were able to explain 2 of the intermediate order, which are complex sticks of the oxygen oxide rock. And we also measure the magnetic mode. So Raman scattering is also able to measure magnetic excitation. And here you have this complex cycloid, and you measure all these sets of spin excitation which are in the plane of polarization or out of plane of polarization. And okay, so we measure it under pressure. We follow it inside the air-free sea phase. So they change in energy, and three of them they merge. And when you get into the first structural transition, you get only two excitation. And then again, when you change, you still get two excitation with different, some energy jump at each of the structural transition. And so we've done a lot of Wang and Belesh and De Souza, they done a lot of calculation, and they concluded that all the states were counted antiferromagnetic of G-type, and they were also able to explain the shape, the pressure dependence of all the magnetic modes. And okay, so I think I have to skip the second one. I just want to show you that sometimes we measure a signal, but we don't know what it is. So just an example of this. It's again the compound I show you, uranium, ruthenium 2, silicon 2. And okay, we measure the phonon, it's easy, but we also measure this at low energy. And we know that this compound has a very strange electronic phase below 17 Kelvin. We call it the hidden order. And we measure a strange Raman signal because it has this symmetry, A to G, which is the one you don't find in Bilbao, and which is the one which transforms like a spin. And so still we are not sure what it is. Maybe it's a crystal field excitation on the uranium ions, but we are not sure. But what is interesting is that we also measure it by neutron scattering. So, but we did better than neutron scattering because we have a symmetry of the excitation. So that's an additional information that Raman scattering always give you if you have single crystal. So they also measure this excitation, same energy, etc., same temperature, same magnetic field dependence. But here, by neutron scattering, they measure it at 001. So the transfer vector is not at gamma, it's finite. And if we measure the same excitation here, by Raman scattering, this is the brilliant zone, we measure at gamma. But neutron scattering, they measure at this point. But if we measure the same, it means that the brilliant zone is folded. So Z point becomes gamma point. So even if we don't know what it is, we know from that when you go inside the hidden order, the brilliant zone is folded. So it's already information. And here I just going to give you information with Bilbao site. This is extremely useful. It's a compilation with additional information of this very old paper, which is very difficult to find. I had to go to a library in Paris, Sorbonne, and I had to show my CNRS card to be able to print it. Okay, but this guy that did a good job, and here you can find the multiplication table and so on. And here's some information. Thank you.